debate. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-Suroît. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to say that I'll be sharing my time with the member for Vancouver East. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to rise today to stand and support the motion standing in the name of my colleague, the member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie, which is designed to deal with the tax loopholes that are beneficial for the richest members of our society, multinationals, etc., and which doesn't help the most vulnerable people, middle-class workers who are filing their taxes on a yearly basis. They'll be doing so within the next month or so. So it's very important for us to have a country that wants to offer good quality services indiscriminately to all Canadians, regardless of our salaries, regardless of what they do. And in order to do so, we need to deal with tax evasion because that leads to huge losses of tax income for the government on a yearly basis. If we want our democracy in Canada, if we want to defend our democracy, if we wanted to treat all citizens equally, then I must say that our tax system doesn't reflect that fairness, that equality, and the unfairness. This gap between the rich and the poor is growing very quickly, at a much quicker pace than in the United States. Tax exemptions and loopholes exist today. We continue to see that, unfortunately. Most workers can't use any kind of deduction or loophole, or credit even. So it's very difficult, or very, in fact, difficult for Canadians to accept that the government isn't taking action to deal with people who are committing fraud.
For example, the highest paid CEOs in Canada earn in half a day what the average worker earns in a year. And we have other statistics here that show that the highest paid CEOs in Canada get 193 times the salary of the average Canadian worker. That's offensive, Mr. Speaker. It's offensive that we can't see to it that those most highly paid CEOs pay their fair share of taxes so that all Canadians can have access to high-quality education and high-quality health care, to make sure that we don't have a two-tiered system. We have our seniors who've worked their whole lives, and then when it comes time for retirement, not everyone has a decent retirement. In my riding, as in others, people are having trouble affording fruits and vegetables every day, and that doesn't make sense in a country as rich as ours, Mr. Speaker. So, the richest Canadians don't need these tax breaks, and the Liberals, unfortunately, are upholding tax loops that benefit the richest when most Canadians are simply left behind. The corporate tax rate went from 38% in 1981 to 15% today. Canadians, individuals, pay between 15 and 33% federally in terms of personal income tax. So many individuals pay higher taxes than multinational corporations. So multinationals contribute very little to the cost of public services, but they benefit from our infrastructure and our highly skilled workforce. And there's not just one tax break that benefits corporations. There are 64 tax breaks. 5 of them are considered progressive, and 59 are considered regressive. What's meant by regressive? Well, that means when the taxes benefit the wealthiest 50% of Canadians rather than the poorest 50% in society. So there are 59 of those tax breaks that benefit the wealthiest. It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. This is not something we could consider fair and equitable in our society. There was shortfall in the tax base of over $100 million last year. And so that money, instead of going to the benefit of the neediest in society, that money has gone to tax havens like the Bahamas, and a number of countries were mentioned. And I'll explain later why those countries, why those tax havens exist. And the government shouldn't conduct its policymaking for the benefit of the richest 1%. It should be rather for the benefit of all Canadians. It should go to public services like healthcare, education, as many of my colleagues have repeatedly said in their speeches. During the election campaign in 2011 and 2015, the Liberals undertook to get rid of tax havens and stock options. Those make up about 25% of the benefits packages of CEOs and the largest companies on the stock exchange. They're only subject to tax to the 50% of the value. So that's a 50% tax break for people who can afford to pay for their stock options. So this is a benefit for the wealthiest CEOs in the first place. They don't need that break. It was supposed to be for startups and so on, but it didn't take very long to realize that this was being used by the wealthiest CEOs too. Real change is needed. The Liberals promised that, but they've simply maintained the conservative policies they used to criticize. We know that Bay Street is lobbying this government hard to retain their tax benefits, and the Liberals are simply making it possible for the wealthiest to maintain their privileges. This is really unfair to hardworking Canadians who struggle to pay their taxes. The Liberals should keep their election promises and put a cap on the amount of the stock option tax benefit. There's also a lot of illegal tax planning. The Quebec government alone estimates that it loses $3.9 billion annually through tax evasion. And for the country, it's up to $47 billion in lost tax revenue. The wealthiest can use tax havens to avoid tax, and this allows them to take advantage of opportunities that individuals cannot avail themselves of here in the country. There's the Cayman Islands, Barbados, and other countries, and there are tax treaties between Canada and those countries, bilateral treaties with 92 other countries. And among those countries, there are countries like Barbados that have a tax rate of 0.25 to 2%, whereas here companies are supposed to pay 15% tax. So those companies have no activities in Barbados or in the Cayman Islands or in those other countries, but they use those countries so they don't have to pay very much tax at all, and then they repatriate their profits to Canada. So we have repeatedly asked successive governments, and now we're asking the Liberal government, to prohibit this type of bilateral tax treaty with countries where there's abuse and fraud and tax evasion. This phenomenon is growing. According to a recent study, financial assets transferred from Canada to the 7 main tax havens was 37% higher than in 1987. So the use of tax havens is at a height right now in Canada. Canada is slacker than other G7 countries in combating tax havens. And the organization responsible for detecting tax cheating was cut by the Conservatives and has not been restored by the Liberals, not fully restored. There were highly qualified auditors and so on, and the estimates say that $1 spent on fighting tax avoidance brings back tenfold to taxpayers and tax revenues. So it is cost effective to combat tax evasion. The Liberals boast about spending $444 million, but there have been no results. There have been no prosecutions. Nothing has changed. And I will continue when it comes time to answering questions. Thank you.